this technology is not a revolution, right? It's an evolution. It's moving its way through time, and it's only getting more mature. It's only getting more complicated. It's only getting more complex. And anyone around the globe that is watching, well, they began to watch it in the Middle East, and then they saw it move towards Ukraine and other hotspots. But drones are I call it the platform that's sneaking up on society. And we're not prepared from a regulatory perspective to really address it. And the problem is there's so many platforms in use now in society. We're talking millions of drones are out there in private hands.
Welcome to the Border Wars podcast. This is the #1 podcast in the Americas, the only bilingual podcast that goes beyond the border. If you're new to our podcast, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or subscribe to any of the platforms that you prefer to listen to in Google, Spotify, Apple. And I call it the #1 podcast because, not because of me, but because of the guests that we have. And we have a very special guest with us today. It's a gentleman that I've known for a few years now, a gentleman that has had quite a distinguished career. Bill, it's good to see you. Welcome to DC. I know you could probably come to DC all the time, but it's always good to see you and welcome you back. How was the flight? How's everything?
Thanks, Joseph. No, great. I just rolled in, landed about half hour ago, and made it over here quickly.
That's the way to do it. Just get off the plane and go straight to the podcast.
Yeah, and DC is I'm very familiar with the DC area. Came here, used to come here a bunch of times.
Cool. When was the last time with the pandemic and everything? When was the last time?
Well, that's a great question. I was actually here in October of 21 doing. I gave a keynote speaking event for my book.
Oh, of course, and that came out. Did that come out in October or November?
November.
Okay, I got my copy. We're gonna talk about the book. We're gonna talk about this book. Let's just kick it off with that then, because this book, I was pleasantly surprised because I've read a lot of memoirs of military men, generals, even famous military men, and oftentimes it's a lot about their accomplishments, right? It's like I did this, I did that, I did this, and so I was like, okay, I know you're accomplished, so I was like, this is gonna be interesting. I'll read it. But actually, it was very kind of like a vivid experience. It was like going into, so I served in Iraq as well. Actually, we were in Iraq at the same time, the first time.
We shared the same dirt.
We shared the same dirt, exactly. A lot of dirt. It brought me back. Yeah. It brought me right back. The smell, I can't smell anything, but describing the smells. And those are the intangibles that I think people don't think about when you watch a movie. You don't think about how nasty it smells, the majority of the time while you're in Iraq.
Yeah.
So the book took us there. It's called Inside Abu Ghraib, Memoirs of Two U.S. Military Intelligence Officers. It's written with you and also, I guess, with who's a general, I believe, right?
He's retired Major General Bob Walters.
Bob Walters, right?
Great friend of mine.
Awesome. And so we'll get into this, but let's go to the beginning, Bill, because you have a distinguished, awesome career in the U.S. Army. Let's talk about when you joined the U.S. Army. Let's go all the way back to 1988. And as I was actually learning from the book, you were a football player.
Yeah.
So you were a wide receiver, right?
Yeah.
So what made a football player say, you know what, I'm not going to go and try for the NFL or go to like these, Division I schools. I'm going to go and be a U.S. Army soldier. What led you to make that decision?
Well, the first one was my dad telling me I needed a real job. The second one was realizing
your dad was in the military, right?
He's retired Navy. The second reason was the talent that I was playing with was far above my talent.
It's a big jump from high school to college.
Yes. Yeah. So I was really good in high school, and when I got to college, I was average.
Okay. Yeah. Where did you play?
I played in San Diego. I played at high school, Poway High School.
Okay. And then in college, did you play?
Cal Lutheran University.
Okay.
And then I went down and played at Palomar Junior College. It was almost like going back to high school to play again. And then I was offered to play at a Division I school and turned it down and joined the Army.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So you were on your way to Division I.
Yeah, I was on my way, but
you must have been really fast and talented because you're not huge. I mean, you're not small, but you're not you think of a wide receiver, 6'2", 6'3", 250, 230, 240 pounds.
Well, in those days, people won't know this analogy, but I modeled myself against Steve Largent, who was like a slot receiver. In today's football, you would say Wes Welker, or someone like that.
Okay.
But those guys are big guys too. I just, and I wasn't fast. I was just crafty.
Okay. So you knew how to get the job done.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So you said, okay, I'm not going to make the NFL, or if I do make the NFL, it's going to be like my body's going to be destroyed. You go into the Army, and I believe you went through ROTC. Is that right?
Yeah, at San Diego State.
San Diego State. Mm-hmm. So tell us the beginning of the Army. I mean, because I was going through your career, but like there's the formative years of the Army, your first 10 years or so.
Right.
Where were you stationed? What did you do?
Yeah, so I had a great time. I was commissioned as an armor officer, cavalry, M1 tanks. I went immediately to Berlin, Germany when I was commissioned. After I went through, obviously, officer basic training. That happens at Fort Knox in those days. Now it's at Fort Benning. It's changed. But I went to Berlin, and I was in the Berlin Brigade.
You went straight overseas.
I did, right to Germany. But I should have wrote the book about this because I was the last armor officer assigned to the Berlin Brigade in history.
Oh, wow.
Because then the Berlin Brigade closed, we call it casing the colors, cased the colors 2 years later. But I spent 2 years as the junior officer in the brigade, which means I did everything that no one wanted to do for 2 years because no one came in to replace me. So,
wow.
So, but it was a great experience.
So you literally turned the lights off, closed the door, locked everything up. Wow.
And at the time, and he just recently passed away. Our brigade commander was a well-known special forces officer named Sidney Shacknow. He was the commander of the Berlin Brigade. And so I got to meet him and interact with him as a second lieutenant, which was fantastic. And what a great mentor. But just a great time going to Germany. It's also where I met my wife.
But in your first tour?
Yeah, in Berlin.
Because you were in Germany at least a couple times, right?
We spent a total of 8 years.
Okay.
8 years in Germany. Okay. Yeah, for the first time and for the second.
You speak German?
I can get by.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, I used to. My wife's fluent.
Wow.
Yeah, she's fluent.
She's American.
She's from Kansas.
Okay.
Yeah, but she was going to the Berlin University. It was called the University, or the Berlin Universität is what it's called. Yeah, she was going to school there.
Very cool. So let's fast forward a little bit because the last time we had a chance to speak was actually on the anniversary of September 11th, the 20th anniversary, which was last year of September 11th. And we talked a lot about how that's changed all of our lives, right? I think every American's life changed with September 11th, but particularly those that were already serving. So like yourself, I obviously don't have as distinguished of a career, but I was in the military before 9/11. And when you go into the military before 9/11, it's a way different mindset of what your career is going to be like. After 9/11, you know we're going to war, and we're all going to war, and it's just a matter of time. So after 9/11, you go to Iraq, right? So that's where we could start picking up on the book because I was in Iraq as well. I was in Iraq in 2003, and I want to set this up a little bit so people remember what's Abu Ghraib. So obviously, when people think about Abu Ghraib, they think about all the scandals, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we got to remember, Abu Ghraib was in the midst of what is called the Sunni Triangle. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And at the time, that was like the most dangerous place on earth.
Yeah, it was horrible.
So the Sunni Triangle, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but it's let's see, it's Tikrit at the north, Baghdad on the east, and then Ramadi on the west. Is that right?
Ramadi, Fallujah.
And then Fallujah's in between.
In between. Yeah.
And then Abu Ghraib's in between Fallujah and Baghdad. Is that right?
Going towards the west.
Going towards the west. Okay.
Yeah.
And so Abu Ghraib under Saddam Hussein was considered like the maximum security prison where you put all the people he didn't like, basically all the political prisoners, anyone that tried to challenge his power. So it was a torture chamber basically for Saddam's political prisoners. Obviously, after Saddam gets deposed, the United States military comes in. It's a detainee center. It's for detainees. You come in right in the beginning. So take us to that. How did that come about? So our unit, we were a long-range surveillance unit. So we were what was called a tactical exploitation battalion. So we had a balance between a LURS, a long-range surveillance company, which was a large company. It wasn't a normal-sized Army company. And then the tactical HUMET teams. So that was really our mission. And we were stationed in Balad. So we were on Balad Airfield. I think it was called at the time LSA Anaconda. Yeah. And we were living there, and we had our mission set. We were working with a brigade out of 4th Infantry Division, and we weren't planning on leaving. And then
in October, roughly late October of 2003, I was in the Tactical Operations Center one night, and the field phone rang, and I picked it up. I was the XO of the battalion, and it was a friend of mine in Baghdad named Mickey Williams, and he said, "Hey, Bill, have you heard of Abu Ghraib?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of Abu Ghraib." I said, "Mickey, I don't even know where it is on the map. I had no idea." And he said, "Well, look on the map and find it." And so I did, and I was like, "Wow, okay, that's a pretty rough part of the neighborhood." And he said, "Yeah, take the battalion down there and fix it." And so our mission order was to fix Abu Ghraib, which was, if anyone knows about the military, that's not a task and purpose mission order. So I said to Mickey, "What does fix it mean?" And he said, "Bill, I don't have time to talk about this. You just need to move the battalion and go fix it." So my boss is Bob Walters. He's the battalion commander.
And he's also the co-author.
He's the co-author of the book. And I said to him, I hung up the phone and I said, "We just got a mission order to take the battalion to Abu Ghraib and fix it." And he's like, "Okay, let's get everyone organized." So that was that night, less than 12 hours.
There's kind of combat orders, basically, in a combat environment. Yeah.
Less than 12 hours later, we were on the road from Balad. It's what was called MSR-1 Tampa, or MSR Tampa. And we were heading to Abu Ghraib to go do a reconnaissance. So we were doing a leader's reconnaissance.
Okay. What did you guys find when you first arrived in Abu Ghraib?
Oh, it was horrible. I mean, there was the idea of discipline, standards, accountability didn't exist.
Was there a military unit already there?
Yeah, there was a unit there. What we tried to do in the book was not focus on any of that. We wanted to focus on our experience of having to go there and actually do the mission, right? And when we got there, our mission was the actual security of the FOB. We didn't have any thing to do with the detainees. That was still a separate mission. So we went to set up standards.
So you're hardening the environment. Yeah,
we're setting the conditions so that the prison itself can be a FOB, so it can operate.
I remember you saying in the book that when you arrived there, you realized I think they had like no checkpoints or no entry security, so pretty much anyone could just drive in.
Yeah. Well, when we got there was no what we call an entry control point. Yeah. And in every FOB in Iraq, you had an ECP and you had screening and you had all the things that took place before you were allowed to get in. This place, you could just drive right in and do whatever you want. We were shocked, actually. So when we got in, we took about 20 people with us from the unit, mostly senior NCOs. Okay. The Sergeant Major and I rode together. And when we got down there, the NCOs just spread out and started executing discipline. That's what they do.
What were the living conditions like, right? Because this is what brought me back when I started reading the living conditions. And you said something in the book that I thought was, I think it's hard for sometimes people to understand that everything you do, whether just like basic things that you do, like hygiene, sleeping, they become functional things. They're not like luxuries anymore. Like if you're sleeping, it's just, you're finding a way to sleep so that you can recover. If you're doing hygiene, it's so you don't get infected or you don't have bacteria, you don't get any diseases or get sick. So everything it now starts to have a purpose. Everything in your life, because if you don't, you could be in a world of hurt very quick. So tell us a little bit about the conditions inside the prison. Did what caught you by surprise? I'm sure, but did it get worse? I imagine it got somewhat better as time went on. I mean, you guys were.
Well, when we got there, it was just horrible. I mean, I say this all the time. It was the worst place I've ever been on the planet, and absolutely just horrible conditions. So when we got there too, it was the winter season, right, or rolling into the late fall winter season. So it changes in temperature. You go from 120 to 90, you think you're freezing, but it's muddy. There's no structure. There's no infrastructure. What's interesting is all the detainees at the time were living in tents, right, around the compound, because there were 4,000 detainees on this FOB. That's a kilometer by a kilometer. Wow. So it's a small space. We're in the center of that, living in a makeshift billeting area that we built ourselves with plywood, but it was a old textile factory that the prisoners used to work in the Saddam Hussein area.
What was your main concern, other than the entry point? But what was your main concern? What did you really want to fix? Because what was the biggest threat that could happen? The biggest threat was just securing the FOB. I mean, there were large gaps in the perimeter wall that you could just walk into if you wanted to. There was Did detainees escape or try to escape? No. So the detainees were kept in it was almost like a detention facility inside of a detention facility. Okay. So it was multi-layered.
But yeah, they were in the open. They were the most exposed to artillery and mortar fire because they lived in tents.
And you're getting mortars every day?
3 times a day.
3 times. Yeah, that makes sense.
3 or 4 times a day because the fob was so small, it was easy to target, right?
Yeah.
It was kilometer by kilometer.
And this is right when the insurgency is starting to pick up, right? The insurgency starts picking up at the end of 2003. 2004 was one of the worst years. I think 2005 was pretty bad as well. It started to go down a little bit after 2006, 2007.
Well, then you had the surge, but when we left in April of 2004,
okay,
and then the big fight in Fallujah took place with the Marine Corps, right, in the Army in that late summer.
Oh wow,
of 2004.
So did you guys see this like forming, the insurgency forming?
We were, by that time we had lived there for so long that we were into the environment, right? We sensed everything at that point. At that point we were almost 10, 11 months in. Yeah. And we were starting to see now the new units come in to replace us with, different ideas of how they wanted to do things. And that's fine. Yeah.
No, honestly, the book surprised me. And I don't know if everyone's going to have the same experience. I think for veterans that went to and served in Iraq, I definitely think this is going to transform you, going to bring you back. Not all the memories are bad per se. I mean, they're just kind of part of your experience. And obviously, one memory I have I'm not proud of this at all. And I was, you covered it actually in the book, which I had to shoot a dog, right? And people I don't say that too often, but people always feel like, oh, what kind of cruel person. I was like, you guys don't understand what kind of dogs we were dealing with.
Right.
I mean, these were dogs that were inside the base, and they're rabid dogs. I mean, these dogs were just trained. I don't even say trained. They were just ready to bite you at any minute. They don't have shots. They don't have immunizations. I mean, if they bite you, you could lose a leg because of rabies and bacteria and infections. So even that, you caught that really. I mean, I could tell right now we had the same experiences in different parts. I was in Akut. I was a little bit further toward the border of Iran, but this book really, I think you did an excellent job. I highly recommend everyone go out and buy it and purchase it. And for those that didn't go to Iraq or didn't have a chance, if you really want to get a real world experience from someone that was there on multiple occasions, but in this case in the early part of the war, you definitely want to read this book, Inside Abu Ghraib. What motivated you to write it? Other than obviously you want to tell the experiences, but you have, I'm sure, a million experiences in your 30 years in the Army. Why did this one?
Well, this one was most significant. It was the one that it made me a better leader, going to Abu Ghraib and working with the people that were in the unit. We became a family. I mean, because today we're still connected with most of the people that were with us during that time. And I'm still good friends with Bob, but what I wanted to mention was, Abu Ghraib itself, one of the things we were fighting was staying healthy. Yeah. Because it was such an environment where you could just get sick really easily. And in fact, I had, I don't know if I mentioned in the book, but I came down with a really bad strep throat during that time. And there's no way to treat it. You had to go to Baghdad, or you had to go somewhere to try to get that treated. And just things like that, simple things that we take for granted at home, they're just hard to deal with. They become hard problems.
No, I remember it's very much like everything. I mean, hygiene is such a big, in the military and in deployments and obviously in theater, it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, your feet, your everything. I remember many people getting sick off the simplest things.
Oh, yeah.
They're not taking care of each other.
Well, and the last 2 things here on this before we, I think, transition, but the book also talks about the family. So there's a lot of our wives and daughters' experiences, which I think is super important to the spouses and of our military now. What happens when your husband or wife goes to war, right? And then just taking that into account and hearing their side of it. What was interesting was what my family wrote in the book, I had never heard before.
Oh, really?
Until they wrote the book.
Oh, wow.
And then until we wrote the book. And then you asked, why did we write the book? Well, because we had the time. So COVID happened in the United States and everywhere globally, and we had time. So everything slowed down. I called Bob and I said, do you want to write this book? And he said, yeah, that would be great. Let's put it together. The backstory on that was I was in London months earlier and I was having dinner with a British friend of mine. And he said, hey, Bill, tell me some U.S. military stories. And I started talking about Abu Ghraib. And he said, Bill, you've got to write a book. I mean, that is book material. I said, John, I don't know how to write a book. I don't have the time. He's like, no, I'm going to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Paul Zanin,
he's the one that pretty much narrates the book through your experience.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a professional author. He writes about boxing. So his passion is boxing. Fantastic guy, great friend of ours. We've become really great friend, both Bob and I, with Paul now. But Paul guided us through the entire process, and really the book comes together because of Paul.
And I think, I could tell because Paul really brings those experiences to life. I'm glad you wrote the book because I think, and even in myself, I tend to forget 20 years almost at this point. So I kind of forget what happened. And I think, and what I also appreciated is, most people, when they think Abu Ghraib, they think of the negative aspects of it, right? The detainee abuses or the torture or enhanced interrogation. And that wasn't just the only story about Abu Ghraib. I mean, Abu Ghraib had a before and an after that. And I think they finally closed Abu Ghraib. I
think they leveled it.
That's
what I heard. They leveled it.
Crater now.
2014. Yeah, that's what I heard.
It's probably way overdue.
Yeah, it was way overdue.
So,
for sure.
So that was the first time you were in Iraq.
Yeah.
Right. And then you went back to Iraq later in your career. What was it? 2009, 2010?
We did our PDSS in 2009, and then we deployed in 10. I was a battalion commander. The battalion I had was in garrison here in the United States was about 450 people. It was a smaller battalion. When I got to Iraq, it was 800 people.
Oh,
so
wow.
It doubled.
So how'd you see the country a few years after you had the initial experiences?
It was totally different because we were in this next round of deployment. We were in a totally different part of the country. We were in the South. So in OIF 1, in the Abu Ghraib story, obviously we're in the Sunni Triangle, right? We're in the heart of the fight. In the South, we're in Dakar province. We're in Basra. We're out in Cab Garrio and in Amara. We're all
the
of
Shia center.
Yeah, we're in the Shia.
Yeah.
And it was totally different experience. And because there's the landscape itself is different. It's spread out. There's not a really.
It's a big desert now.
Yeah, unless you get to the cities like Basra, and so or Nasiriyah.
Yeah, Nasiriyah.
And we were the FOB that I commanded in that tour was just south of Nasiriyah, but I also had command of Bucca, which was all the way down on the border. It was the other detention.
Well, you met David, I think in the webinar that we did back last year.
Right.
So David Granham's our senior fellow that lives in Texas. He was at Camp Bucca.
Right.
That was his assignment. So
yeah.
He was there. But he was there with the Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigations, another intel unit.
The thing about Bucca at that time was my mission was to transfer Bucca to the Iraqi government. So
is that right?
We had taken all the detainees out of there by the time I took command. So the Bucca itself was a functioning FOB, but the whole purpose at the time was to transfer it to the governor of Basra province.
Were you guys able to do that?
Well, yeah, I got a great story on that. I mean, I was told by at this time I was working for the 1st Infantry Division commander, and his division commander. It's called the assistant division commander of support. It was a guy named General Dragon, and we had the mission.
His name is General Dragon.
Yeah, Randy Dragon.
Okay,
he,
nice.
he actually, I think he lives here in the DC area. So anyway, I had the mission to have it turned over to the Iraqis by the end of 2010. So I took the mission in roughly February, March of that year, and took us about 10 or 11 months to really get it ready to go. And on Christmas Day, the Iraqis said they weren't taking it, and we wanted to do the transfer.
Why?
Like 3 days. There's a story behind that too. It's it was more personality driven.
Okay.
And so what I had to do was convince the governor of the province in Basra to take the FOB. And this FOB had a multi-million-dollar waste management facility on it. It had a multi-million-dollar water purification facility on it. And it was a great asset for that part of the country. So villages like Safwan could benefit, or Qasr.
Yeah.
Those places could benefit from those services. So that's one of the things I was trying to explain to the political people of Basra. And so finally, I convinced him 3 days
You got him,
later.
you got him.
We shook hands. And
How'd you convince him? How'd you convince him?
I said, you got to take it. You don't have any choice.
That's a good way to convince him.
Yeah. And so he took it, and we
Called
did
battlefield diplomacy.
battlefield diplomacy. But I mean, for 10 months, I kept
Yeah.
asking him, please.
It sounds like it was a good deal. I mean, you're basically getting all this infrastructure, and you.
Fantastic.
And I remember Umm Qasr is where the oil fields are, right?
No, it's the port.
It's the port.
Port city.
Yeah.
And it's where all goods come into Iraq. And basically, I think what Bucca is now, or it's not called Bucca, but what it is now is a logistics hub for the port. Okay. And it makes sense. It's super close. It's not that far away.
So in this time, so you get the base, you get the fob over to the, was it the governors?
Yeah, the governor of Basra province took control of the fob.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I remember in our previous discussions, you mentioning that this is where you actually got to see a bit more about what we're going to talk about next, which is the point of a paper that we're going to publish that Bill wrote about unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned air systems. Tell us about your experience with that. How did you get into drones? Was it this experience in Iraq, or did you know about drones before that?
Yeah. Great. So in OIF 1, I had some experience with some of the army systems, the military systems, because we were on Balad, right? And so we were able to have some experience with what the military had at that time. Fast forward to 2009, 2010, I'm actually a commander of a unit that has UAV capability. And I'm in
reconnaissance and weaponized drones. Or?
No, just ISR.
ISR. Okay.
It's ISR, so surveillance and reconnaissance. And I'm in Kuwait with the battalion, and we're getting ready to move the entire unit into Iraq, and then take our positions into the OER, right? The operational environment. And not OER, that was my officer evaluation report. But anyway, the OEO, the operational environment. So as I'm in Kuwait, I run into another unit that is a UAV platoon that is looking for an assignment. So we actually just called Baghdad at the time and said, hey, there's a unit down here that's another UAV platoon, and they need a home. We'll provide them that home. So we actually added a second UAV platoon to the brigade, which was not common.
Okay.
So we ended up having two. And I went to my commander and I said, how do you want to allocate these resources? And he told me, he said, I want to give it to an infantry battalion. I want to give it to an artillery battalion. And that's where
it's quite an asset to have. I mean,
the commanders loved it. Yeah. And they're friends of mine. They both loved having that capability. So we gave that to them, and we flew it 24/7. I mean, that's what we did. We flew it 24/7. It was the platform, for the tactical brigade at the time.
And at this time, the insurgents and the others, the militias, they don't have this capability quite yet, right? So we have quite a bit of technological superiority, but that didn't stay that way, right? So I remember reading when we were doing the paper. I remember reading that I think it's 2016, or when ISIS was pretty much strong, 2015, 16, that ISIS ended up getting their hands on some of these drone platforms. And in some ways kind of equaled the battlefield, equaled the playing field to some level, which this, I think, gets into the heart of the paper. The paper is called Killer Drones, just like the name of the podcast. And the reason is because if we go back when you were in Iraq in 2003, that was pretty much a sensitive technology that really only militaries had the ability to operate. Yeah. Even when you get back to Iraq in 2009 and 10, we have your units, the U.S. military has the capability to use these platforms. But commercial, they're not as available. And
no. In fact, the first commercial drone comes to market in 2010.
Is that right?
So, and it comes to market by through a French company called Parrot, and it's a drone company. They since this time they're no longer in the commercial market. They still produce, I think, in other ways. But at that time, 2010 is when the first drone is available for consumer purchase.
Okay.
And that's when I'm in Iraq at 2010, 2011 timeframe. And I start getting really interested into this technology. And I keep thinking to myself, this is the technology that's evolving so quickly, it's literally going to sneak up on society. Yeah. And which we can get into Ukraine if you want to at some point, but and other areas. But look at what's happening right now. We're talking about complete drone usage from a convergence perspective of commercial and military assets coming together.
Well, no, let's talk about Ukraine, because I mean, I think we kick off the paper with this because I thought this was a real interesting anecdote. They call them Terminator drones, right? So the Ukrainians who they're battling probably one of the most I think the most authoritarian threats that exist out there, right? The Russian regime, the Russian military, and they have some drones. I'm sure they don't have full capabilities, but the Ukrainians themselves, the people, have all kinds of commercial drones now. Now it's become very popular. So President Zelensky asks the people, he's like, if you got drones, throw them out there. And part of the reason was the Russians couldn't tell which drones were actually weaponized and which drones were just for surveillance.
Right.
And so they started dressing up some of these drones to look like Skynet from Terminator, and would just freak the Russians out. That they would get to a zone, drones would fly overhead, they would retreat back to their operating spaces, and then the drones would find their positions, and then that's when they'd be able to attack them.
Well, this technology is amazing, and I hope people get more excited about it like I am. But if you go back, let's just take some steps back and talk about the Middle East and our conflicts. So when I was in 2010, AQI was still the organization we were up against, right?
That's pre-ISIS, right?
Pre-ISIS. And they were starting to experiment with the commercial platforms because
even back then,
they needed something, right? They're smart. I mean,
how did they get access to it? Because you said you just started around 2010, right?
Yeah, I mean, when it goes to market, you can purchase it.
Okay,
and
so they were first in line.
Probably, I would assume. But and so you start to see this evolution take shape, and then as the conflict in the Middle East, specifically Iraq and Syria, starts to build, more and more of this commercial drone platform is used by ISIS, and it starts to mature, right? Because it goes from an ISR capability to a weapons delivery capability. So they start to refine those. Well, if you move a little further into time, then you come into conflicts like Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Border conflicts.
Drones become very, very important in that fight. And then as we see in the early 2014 of Ukraine, the Ukrainians and the Russians, and there's a conflict going on even before this war has started. In 2014, it started.
Yeah, Crimea.
Yeah, Crimea, and then, of course, the border areas. But drones are being used, and we're starting to see really creative and innovative ways of using 3D printed drones.
Wow,
are entering the battlefield, things of that nature. And now what we're seeing, unbelievable. And basically, the whole point of this is that the evolution has taken shape, but everyone around the globe is watching, and which we'll get into some of the other things I think we'll address.
So back then, right? So let's say 2010, when AQI was one of the first in line to get this new French commercial drone. Back then, I'm sure the military's capabilities with drones was far superior to whatever the commercial side had. Yeah. Where is it at today? Has the commercial caught up with the military? Where are we at in terms of disparity?
Totally different application, right? So capability-wise, commercial drones have amazing capability. Military drones are created for a different purpose, and they've always had a different level of capability. But if you talk about like payloads on a commercial drone, cameras are 4K. You have LiDAR capability, you have thermal capability.
We have a drone. I remember when we were working on your paper, something that caught my eye was, and I think people don't realize this, but drones can have internet connection, right? Mm-hmm. And because they can have internet connection, they can spoof and they can get into your Wi-Fi connection, and that means they can then steal information and data. Is that something that you're seeing? Is that technology? Is that capability evolved to where we have to be worried if we see a drone, we just hide our phones or get off our Wi-Fi?
Well, I mean, I think it's something. So I talk about it as a cyber attack platform. Yeah. Basically, someone that's creative or has the technical capability can put on on that drone what's called a Raspberry Pi. Basically, it's a computer. It's a compute capability, and that's how you can spoof unsecure networks. So if your network is secure, you're doing the right things, you're probably okay. But from a cyber security platform, we have to be concerned with that. Not to mention the ISR capability from drones. I mean, just think surveillance and reconnaissance capability with the types of cameras. DJI has a great platform out now called the Mic 30, the M30. People should look it up and see what the capabilities are. But we're talking very high power payloads of ISR capability on those.
Yeah. So one I guess where where I start to get very concerned is not so much in the sense that just normal criminals can abuse this technology, which any technology is always available for illicit actors, but the major criminal organizations, I'm talking like the big ones, right? The Mexican drug cartels, the Colombian drug cartels, the Middle Eastern terrorist organizations. Are you seeing this? Are you seeing them now embracing this technology? I know we've seen, like we talk about in the paper, we've seen probably the biggest Mexican cartel right now is the Jalisco New Generations cartel. And they upload their drone footage on YouTube.
Right.
So they want to show you that they have that capability because it projects some sense of power and superiority,
Right.
and people get scared, right? So is this something? Tell us a little about the role of illicit actors in drones.
Absolutely. This is what I've been talking about though for years now. Is that again? It's not, this technology is not a revolution, right? It's an evolution. It's moving its way through time. And it's only getting more mature. It's only getting more complicated. It's only getting more complex. And anyone around the globe that is watching, well, they began to watch it in the Middle East, and then they saw it move towards Ukraine and other hotspots. But drones are I call it the platform that's sneaking up on society. And we're not prepared from a regulatory perspective to really address it. And the problem is there's so many platforms in use now in society. We're talking millions of drones are out there in private hands.
I think you put a data point in the paper. I think I have it here. You said the global market of drones is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 20.5%. That could hit as high as $43 billion in just 2 years, in 2024, which is actually less than 2 years. So we're talking a lot of money. This is a big industry.
Yeah, huge industry. And that's why it's a topic we have to address, right? And so to answer your question, of course, any nefarious type of organization, or an organization that wants to gain some sort of superiority from using that technology will use it.
So what reaction are you getting from companies, from entities that are starting to learn or embrace that this is a potential threat when we need to do a vulnerability assessment of our compound, whether it's a sports arena or whether it's a concert? Or what reaction do you get? Because I feel like probably a lot of people's blank stares.
Yes.
They just don't understand.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
So what they're waiting for is the event to happen.
The 9/11 for drones. Yeah.
Right, or whatever it is. I mean, but what I worry about, and what my my partner's worried about, that we currently do this type of work, is preparing venues and facilities and any type of organization that hosts the public, that the drone it can be a threat. Now, it could also be something used for positive aspects. You could be filming an event, things like that. There's always two sides to the story. But in this case, we've got to prepare and risk mitigate as much as possible. And we're just not doing it. We're waiting. I think people are just waiting for that event to happen so they can say, oh, we need to do something. We shouldn't be that way. We should be more proactive.
Yeah, that had, unfortunately, and we're in Washington, and that tends to happen here. Like, it's a very reactionary culture here in Washington. Policymakers tend to wait till the American public has an outcry, usually because of something. I mean, we're experiencing that on all different levels. But I guess the idea of the business you're in is to prevent this.
To try to educate, to prevent, to come up with frameworks and systems so that people can actually use them in a manner that helps their business. We don't do anything just to do it. We're doing it for a purpose, which is understand the threat in your environment, understand how it affects your business, and what could happen if someone in a nefarious mindset wants to put on a commercial drone a 40 millimeter grenade.
Wow.
And that's the common ordnance you see on these drones.
Grenades.
Yeah. Grenades, 40 millimeter, and they're easily dropped from a commercial drone. And if you did that at a public event, it's going to be a bad day.
And how does, the thing when I think about is airspace, how does jurisdictions work? Because who's in charge of monitoring drone activity? Because I don't think they fly as high as to where it would be like an FAA thing, or is it FAA that?
Well, so this is the struggle. So I've said multiple times that we're going to have a drone superhighway over our heads in the next 5 years, is what I keep saying. And I tell people to call me.
Back to the Future, it's not going to be cars. It's going to be drones.
It's going to be drones and autonomous vehicles everywhere, ground, sea, air. But in this case, drone superhighway, and not all of it's going to be bad. In the highway itself indicates that there's commerce happening. Companies,
Amazon's right trying to get into the
all types of companies are trying to get into this drone delivery market, right? But you can think there's a lot of positives to that. Maybe medical deliveries quicker, supplies, things like that. That could be good for society. But what you have then is how do you determine what's good and what's bad? And that's
the drone police.
There's a term called unmanned traffic management, and it's a concept, UTM. It's a concept that's starting to take shape, and we're starting to figure out what that should look like. UTM is on the horizon of taking shape in this country, and
what authority is UTM fall under?
Well, we need federal. I think we need the federal government to
Would that
lead,
be like a Homeland Security?
Yeah, lead that effort, or the FAA. FAA, yeah. But the question you're asking is, and I'm not an FAA expert, so someone could counter this, but at 400 feet AGL and above is where the FAA starts to monitor air traffic. 400 to ground level, that's where drones are going to operate. So I say 2 to 4. That's why I say it. 2 to 400 feet. And and you won't even at that elevation, you wouldn't even hear a drone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how quiet they are.
Wow. In the paper, we get a little bit into the risk mitigation, right? So if you were to look, like, let's just pretend you get I'm sure this happens all the time. You get your businessman, your CEO that knows nothing about drones, and he's running a business, right? He's running let's just say he's running a sports franchise, right? So he knows a lot about his industry, the market, and you tell him, you're holding public events,
right?
And these public events have open airspace, and you're in Mexico, and there's bad actors that can potentially want to carry out some type of attack. Or what is your biggest pitch to them, or maybe I'm saying pitch is the right word.
That's right. That's right.
What is your biggest way to sell them on this?
The value proposition or the business approach to this from our perspective is do a series of frameworks, security frameworks that will help the facility or the owner understand what the threat is and how they can mitigate the risk. So we start with this idea that I came up with called a Drone Vulnerability Risk Assessment, DVRA. Okay. And it's a framework.
Say that again, Drone Vulnerability Risk Assessment.
Yeah, okay. DVRA. And that's
is that like a threat vulnerability assessment just applied to drones?
Yeah, okay. Exactly. But it takes into account different aspects like point of launch locations, wayfinding. Most drone operators, they navigate their drone by physical structures. Yeah. So they wayfind right to a place. Like I'm gonna fly my drone to that building, and I'm gonna turn it left, and I'm gonna go this way. That's a simple example. Okay. So you do that type of assessment so that you know what the ingress and egress routes are into your facility. You do a little bit of terrain analysis is what it is. So the DVRA is what I call the first leg of the chair. The second leg is actually getting a company into your facility that does drone detection and monitoring through a technical capability like RF, right? Radio frequency or radar or even optical. So the second leg of the chair is a true assessment of the drones flying in your airspace from a technical perspective. Okay. So you do that for 2 weeks to 30 days, and you can get a really good pattern analysis.
Where do you get that information?
So I have partners in the industry that build that capability and will provide it.
You can at any given time say, like, in a specific geographic coordinate or area, you can figure out what drones are flying in that area?
Absolutely.
Is it because they're registered or?
No, well, every drone, there's 2 ways to fly a drone, either through RF, radio frequency, or through GPS.
Okay.
And so,
of course, like cell phones, yeah.
Yeah. So these companies provide that product and that service to tell people what's in their airspace. That's the second leg of the chair. The third is what's called the drone emergency response planning. So basically, you're putting together your plans to mitigate the risk of drones. And then you're substantiating those plans into standard operating procedures so that your staff can train for it. The fourth leg of this chair is tabletop exercises.
Simulations.
Simulations. So then you exercise how you respond to a drone over your event. Let's say it's a Washington Nationals game and they're playing whoever, and there's a drone event. If you've gone through these steps, you'll have at least a framework or a plan on how to react.
What kind of events you think would be most vulnerable to this?
Oh, any type of, in this day and age, it's any type of concert, it's anything
that's open air.
Anything is open air. Even arenas need, in their public space outside of the arena is sometimes enticing for drone operators to just fly over and see how many people are there.
Yeah.
But when you get we worry about public space, and public space is also when you're lining up for your ticket.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you queue up, or if you're lining up to get into a security gate, you're still presenting yourself in a large mass of people.
That's interesting. Now, I want to shift a little bit from the commercial aspect of drones, which I think it's as you said, I mean, in my mind, what comes to mind is really kind of the evolution, as you mentioned, and in this case of information, right? Information has gone leaps and bounds in the last 20 years. Like, it's not even recognizable the way information is consumed, the way it's disseminated to where it was maybe when you were in Iraq in 2003.
Right.
And with that has come the negative aspects of information control, which is disinformation, misinformation, which starts to basically change the perceptions and the opinions of many. Well, I feel like drones is along that same course, right? Drones is changing the behaviors of individuals. It's changing the way we interact and consume and produce, and convenience, I think, is a big part of drones, because if you don't have to go to the pharmacy to get your prescription, and
right.
you can drone deliver it. I see people, and it's cost effective. I see people doing this, right? It's like an advanced version of Uber Eats or things like
right.
that.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going, right? And so, as you mentioned, this is an evolution. So at some point down the line, in the not too distant future, we're going to be living with drones flying overhead at all times, every time, 24 hours a day.
Well, think about the next phase is urban air mobility.
Yeah.
So that's where people are flying around in unmanned vehicles as a service. So a taxi, as an example, might be an unmanned aerial vehicle that takes you from point A to point B.
Yeah, and so in that, I think that what I want to talk a little bit about is, what is the military's role in this? What does the military sit on this? Because is the military prepared to encounter adversaries that have both military drones, which they have, but also have commercial drones with non-state actors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're seeing that play out in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so the answer is yes. I mean,
hybrid warfare.
Absolutely. How could we not? How could we avoid it? Right? How could we not address it? That wouldn't make any sense. This technology is here to stay, and it's only getting better. It's maturing every day, and not only maturing in capability from a technical perspective, but in use cases is maturing as well. On the flight out today, I read a story about a 15-year-old Ukrainian boy who put his drone into a battle in Ukraine, and it actually he's like the hero of the battle with his commercial drone that he put in place, because he had eyes on the enemy.
Oh, wow. Right.
And he was able to use that drone to give that information to the Ukrainian military so they could actually fight the Russians. But it's a big story today, at least on my news thread, from this 15-year-old kid who was employing his drone because President Zelensky said, get it in the fight. Yeah. And he did. And
so as far as near peer adversaries, adversarial nation states, who's the most advanced when it comes to the use or application of drones?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen what the Russians are doing, but I don't, we haven't seen what
Iran's used drones.
Yeah, of course. We haven't seen what the Chinese capability is, but from a perspective of what we see from the Russians, some of their platforms are pretty outdated. I mean, you look at like the Orlan 10.
That's what so it seemed like the commercials actually surpassing to some level the military drone capabilities, because its ability to have density and just more coverage because there's more drones.
Well, also the Ukrainians are winning the IO war. That's what we're hearing, I don't know, it's hard to armchair quarterback that, right? But just to look at it from a technical perspective, there are platforms like the Turkish TB2 is a huge success for the Ukrainian army, military. The Israeli Harpo is a autonomous loitering munition that finds its own targets. So there are platforms out there from various countries that are very, very capable.
How is the Orlan 10? That's an ISR drone? Yeah. Is most notably so? The reason I've run into the Orlan 10 is because of the Colombia-Venezuela border conflict. The Russians sold the Orlan 10 to the Venezuelan regime, and the Venezuelan regime created a drone battalion. And in that drone battalion, they've deployed the Orlan 10 to do ISR missions along the border with Colombia. Now, they claim it's because they're fighting narco traffickers, right? But the Venezuelan government's well in the narco trafficking business. More what they're doing is to spy on the Colombian military. So what they've seen was that the Orlan 10 has a capability in electronic espionage, that they can match it with mobile electronic radar systems. I think it's the P-30 mobile radar system. And that with the drone allows them the ability to do electronic warfare, electronic espionage on the Colombian military. Is that something that you think the Orlan 10 that's the maximum capability of it, or
I would think. I mean, what I've seen, and again, it's just what I'm watching in the open press, right? But the systems the Russians are employing in Ukraine are so simplistic. Some of them have Canon SLR cameras on them.
Okay.
Instead of a real payload.
Yeah.
Some of them are the fuel tanks are water bottles, things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a logistics problem. That could be a parts problem. I mean, I don't know. The system is designed to do what you just said, which is to provide ISR. It's not a strike capability.
Yeah.
But we're seeing these things that are just incredibly immature. And then if you talk about the Turkish TB2 that Ukrainians are using, they're absolutely getting every Ukrainian dollar out of that platform by putting it into service in this war. So
I think you're you're obviously in a growth market, but more than importantly, I think you're in something that I think here in Washington, the conversation really hasn't begun yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's obviously people experts, military officials that are speaking about this to policymakers on the Hill. But I don't think the policymakers are taking this as serious as they should. And probably because of what you mentioned, probably because there hasn't been that incident, right? Mm-hmm. Yet here in the United States, at least, where drones have been involved in a major terrorist attack or a major incident that involves the American public. But that, I don't want to say that's coming, because hopefully it's not coming, but something inevitably is going to happen and spark. So when it comes to policymakers, how do we get this into their attention without, hoping that drone attack alarms them into into taking action on this?
I think it starts with educating them, right? I mean, we've got our policymakers need to understand what this technology can do, and I think I think the FAA is making an honest effort from the commercial side of this. But when you talk about establishing law, establishing regulations, establishing those things to protect us from this technology, we need to do more education on that. I really think that they don't understand. See, most people think it's just a recreational tool.
Yeah. That
you just buy it on Amazon, you're going to go fly it in your park, and you're going to have fun with it. Like when I grew up, radio aircraft or those types of tools or toys were available, right? You could go fly this thing in the park, and it would just, you'd have fun with
remote control model planes.
Yeah, that stuff. But we're so advanced now that I'll give you a great example. I was walking my dog by our community pool, and a drone actually flew down to about 10 feet above my head and just looked at me with its and then
did you wave?
Yeah, I waved at it, but then it just went straight up into the air above me and flew away. But it was some person flying a drone near the pool that was using it to watch people walking by, or whatever,
filming or
or whatever. Yeah, I mean the technology, and that person could have been flying that drone from 5 kilometers away.
Wow. So
there's a time and distance in this capability as well.
So we just got to fly it over the congressional members. Is that like get them alarmed by?
Well, I would love to just have the topic addressed so that people understand what capabilities out there, how it, both positive and negative, but how the negative aspects could really be a bad day for the country if someone decides to do something wrong with it.
And the paper kind of goes into 2 specific things. One is critical infrastructure, because that bad day could most likely involve some aspect of critical infrastructure.
Right.
But the second, and I think this is probably the most important recommendation, at least for folks here in DC, is that this doesn't have to be as complicated as it sounds. Right? It sounds very complex. It sounds very technical. But when you explain it, Bill, and I think most importantly, when congressional members start to take on this. They realize that this is just going to be a way of life. And the internet was probably super complex when it came around, and everyone was like, "What are we going to do? No, it's not going to last." And now everyone knows how to use it. I mean, it's not as complex as we think. I think the same thing is going to happen with drones. And in that, there's a recommendation in the paper to create a standing task force on commercial drone use. And that's, I think, part of that educational process. I think if we can nudge or convince policymakers or just even one member on the Hill to stand up this kind of task force, I think we're going to see our legislature get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are initiatives through the FAA, right, to do this. But to say that there's a whole of government approach to this, I don't think it exists. Now, if someone could prove me wrong, but there needs to be a government-private coalition on this technology. It needs to come together at the government level. I mean, absolutely, it needs to be a legislator that takes the champions this issue, and then gathers all the smart people. And look, I don't consider myself even close to being an expert on drones, but I'm super passionate about how the technology is going to shape society. And there are people I'm connected to that do know this technology like the back of their hand. They could build this stuff themselves, and they understand the capabilities. Those are the type of people we need to get into our body that's going to study this and figure out how we're going to, like I mentioned, UTM is on the way. The FAA did put out a rule for a digital license plate in 2020, but it doesn't go into effect for 3 years. So we're probably getting closer to that time where it goes into effect. But that still doesn't account for the drones that are already out in the market, are already out in the public space, because they can't do anything about those drones.
Okay.
It's only those drones that are going to be bought after the time that the law goes into effect or the regulation.
So you'll have to register them with an authority.
Well, you're supposed to now, but it's not something that's mandatory. But again, getting all the experts around this and really thinking about it is super important, because, like I said, the superhighway's on the way. You could probably take a survey of this block we're in here, and you could ask people walking by, "Do you own a drone?" They'd probably say yes. So it's you can buy it on any store, any online.
No, store. Really? Yeah, no. We bought ours in Amazon. So
right, at Amazon, right.
They're available. So the last part I want to talk to you about is so, as you could tell, the title of the podcast, Border Wars, we talk a lot about not just our border issue that we have on the U.S. southern border, which is, I think, a big part of why we're doing the podcast, but we call it just border wars, so like borders throughout, because I think borders are being challenged in many different ways. We talk about weaponized drug trafficking. We talk about weaponized migration. How drones can change this concept of borders, because I saw this in the Colombia-Venezuela border when I was mentioning with the Russian drones, but it's almost like as if, what do you consider a drone overflight over territorial airspace of a sovereign nation? Is that is that like as if the Air Force was flying over your airspace? Is that what is that?
Well, it's uncontrolled airspace. Yeah. So where drones fly normally is under the 400 feet. Yeah. Where air traffic is tracked. So I don't know. That's, again, something that this legislative body should take up and understand.
And the reason I mention that is because what I'm concerned about is not just the illicit actors. We talked about that. I think that's definitely going to happen, and it's already happening. What I'm concerned about is when these big nation states, right, the adversaries of the United States, the autocracies of the world, the authoritarian regimes, who are looking to change geography. They're literally just looking to reshape the world as it stands. That's part of changing international order. If they figure out how drones can actually blur the lines on the map, meaning that it now complicates the abilities to control your sovereign territory, then they can just litter that whole border area with drones, to the point that you can't tell the difference of who's a Colombian drone, who's a Venezuelan drone, who's a Mexican drone, who's a U.S. citizen drone. And I think that this has the potential to destabilize borders. And so we have to figure that part of this out.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I think if you look at, again, something I just read recently, but over our border, I think our southern border, over 9,000 cartel flights of drones into the U.S.
Is that right? Is that right?
Wow. I think that's the number I read today. So think about that. And that's probably just a snapshot in time over a certain period of time, maybe let's say 6 months or something. Yeah. So we don't even, the point is we don't even know. If we can say 9,000 is what we think in one border incident, that's a surge of capability that isn't even tracked. And no one has any ability to track it unless you're putting a drone detection and monitoring capability on the borders and you're physically doing that pattern analysis day in and day out to prove what you have. That doesn't mean you have the ability to do anything about it, because drone detection is not kinetic. But if you want to, or if you wanted to secure a border, or if you wanted to do something, there are kinetic capabilities to do that. And that doesn't mean shooting the drone down. It could mean taking control of the drone through its RF signal. It could mean sending another drone up to capture it. They actually have drones that do that. They call them drone hunters.
Okay. Like a drone Top Gun.
Yeah. And but things like that are, but everyone, it's not science. It's not sci-fi.
Yeah.
I mean, we are living this now, and it's getting more and complicated, more mature. Again, go back to what's happening on the border of this country, what's happening in Colombia. These platforms are being used, and they're being used for the purpose of drug cartels business, right?
They deliver drugs,
whatever it may be. And they're also being used as weapons delivery platforms. Yeah. So it's not just, a service into the country. It is, they're using them for kinetic strikes as well.
So that brings me to one of the questions I wanted to ask you. So in your career, and I'm looking at your short bio. It's not that short, but it's abbreviated here. You spent a lot of time with Northern Command, both at the Combatant Command and also at the Theater Special Operations Command level with SOCNORTH at different points in your career, I'm saying. So what is the military's role, particularly the Special Operations role, when it comes to the southern border?
Yeah, so really no role. It's all law enforcement, right? Okay. So, and that's how I think it's how it should be, right? It's the sovereign protection of our borders, and that falls on the LE side of the house. But what we do get to learn by working in those environments is what is actually happening, so that that it's almost like a lesson learned event, because when when the DoD goes somewhere, it's normally outside. It's always outside of the country. So you deploy into a region like Ukraine. We see right now with Ukrainian military fighting the Russians. There's a lot of lessons learned they're gleaning, but they're also creating a lot of lessons learned for everyone in the world to see. And this is a discussion I had with a friend of mine yesterday. Was think about all the things we're learning right now and how that's valuable for the next conflict. Because what's happening now is it's not going to go away. You could almost say it's an RMA, right? A revolution in military affairs. I think I've even tried to equate it, but it's where a technology actually changes warfare. So a good example is the machine gun in World War I. Yeah.
The rifle musket back in the early days.
And I wrote a paper when I was in the War College about how social media was an RMA. Yeah. Social media changed warfare.
The IO aspect,
during the Arab Awakening. And so now we're seeing drones do the same thing. And so I think is
it enough to change like a whole generation of warfare? Or is it, so we could go into the fifth generation.
I think so. Think about the power of the Russian Air Force, right? Well, the drones aren't creating air parity, but they're creating some sort of parity for the ground organization to operate at a different level. Yeah. So it's something there that's happening, but
But I think especially when you combine it with the cyber domain, then it becomes really an equalizer.
Well, and the true historians will probably argue with me, but I think we're seeing an RMA. And again, the term is revolution, right, in military affairs. I think it's an evolution in military affairs, but still it's changing the framework. Look at it. It's another tool in the tool bag that is having significant effects.
I think you're right, because if we think about the big shift that we've had in the last 100 years, which is the third to fourth generation, right? So the third generation was all logistics and the ability to use command and control. And then fourth generation flips it on its head because it introduces non-state actors in ways that we never saw, and because public opinion becomes that much more important with the information, the evolution of the internet and the way information is spread. Social media then comes around, which revolutionizes the way people use information and, by extension, as we mentioned, disinformation. And now drones come into the picture, which combines both that aspect of I/O, the cyber realm, as well as the conventional military kinetic strikes and other kinds of different kinds of payloads. So it essentially combines many different aspects of warfare, which I think you're right. I think we're moving into a new domain and new territory. And what I fear is that our adversaries, the Russians, I mean, they're not looking too good right now with their drone program in Ukraine, but they're going to learn.
Yeah.
They're gonna fix that.
Yeah.
We don't really fully know what China's drone capabilities are. In Iran, despite being very deficient on many levels, they've shown that they can have PGMs, precision guided munitions, with drones that can blow things up like the Saudi Aramco facility.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen that.
Yeah.
I think what you just described is fantastic because it really outlines where we've been and where we're going to. You're never going to have to. We're never going to not need a ground force, so we're never not going to need tanks or airplanes or any of the technology we have now. The drone is just an added layer of capability and complexity to the modern battlefield, that what we call the MCO environment, right? The major combat operations. That's what we're seeing in Ukraine, or we did initially, and we still are. But that is the level of complexity. So think about just the matter, and you talk about information, the amount of data that's coming in for a commander to make decisions on is extremely complex. So they have so much coming in, it almost fogs the ability to make decisions because you have so much information
overload. Yeah.
Right. When in past conflicts, the commanders had decisions they had to make based on finite details. The scouts are reporting this, or, this aircraft is reporting this. Now it's a data influx. And so I think it just complicates it. It does make it a complex problem. Yeah.
And it seems like that's something also that would have been atypical, because it wouldn't have been something that an ordinary mission set that the TSOC would do. And so let me just end with this. First, Bill, I think from your book to your paper on drones, and we have a title for it. We call it Killer Drones, not to alarm people, but essentially they can become very deadly if we don't start to engage in this. To all the work that you're currently doing, what do you want to plug? Is there anything that you want to give a shout out to as we end the podcast?
No, just great conversation. Thanks for letting me come in and do this. You did a great job talking about the book. That's sort of what I'm really happy about. What I want people to.
It's really a
read.
great book. I think definitely needs to get more publicity so that more people can read it. I feel like we're coming up on. We did the webinar on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Well, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, which I think would be March of next year, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I'm sure that's going to, hopefully there isn't an incident like we had with Afghanistan in Iraq with a kind of a disastrous withdrawal. But it's going to become a point of conversation. The 20 years, what have we learned, experiences, and I think that's a good time to get people to look at things like your book, your memoirs, that I think revisit a lot of these things that are now in history, believe it or not.
Yeah, transitioning the military out of this counterinsurgency mindset and getting back to MCO, which is major combat operations, and getting the force trained. One of the great things about you and I, when we were there in 2003, at that point in my career, I had been in the military close to 14 years. And in those previous 14 years, what did I do? I just trained. I trained and trained and trained. So we became very proficient as a military on how we executed our tasks and our mission. And I think the statistic is we had destroyed the Iraqi army in 17 days, I think is what it took. And then we were getting into this stability operations mentality, which, as you probably read through history, was where the insurgency regrouped.
Yeah.
And then in that summer of 2003, August, September is when we see the first IED.
I remember.
The change, and then we're there for another decade, right?
So, I mean, we're talking about evolution of warfare. I think Iraq is a good case study for the evolution of warfare, because with the 20 years, we absolutely saw warfare evolve. Everything from drones getting introduced to the battle space, obviously we went from insurgency to dealing with classical counterinsurgency and military. And I think that Iraq as a battle space will continue to evolve also because it's between Iran and Syria.
Yeah.
And so we know Syria is a major conflict. Iran's a major adversary. And so Iraq's it's got
strategic ground.
It's strategic ground, and it's got the unfortunate of being geographically positioned in a very difficult part of the world. But Bill, thank you again. We're going to definitely invite you to come back probably on the 20th anniversary of Iraq.
That'd be great.
To start talking.
I have a second book coming out.
Do you?
Yeah.
What's it about?
It's going to editing. It's a leadership book that also has, it's 3 parts. It's leadership, evolving technology, and then security.
It's like all your worlds coming together.
Yeah, it's
cool.
my wife's idea. She said you need.
When did you become so prolific? Because you said I wasn't a writer, but you're writing now. You're writing papers with us, books on the side.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't. It just
the pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic.
Got to do something
into writing mode.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you,
Bill. It's awesome. Great to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
We're gonna. Well, a couple quick things to say. Everyone go out and buy this book, Inside Abu Ghraib. It's already important. It's already, I think, a big part of the military history in the war in Iraq and the war on terror. But more importantly, I think next year with the 20th anniversary of the Iraqi invasion, I think we need to have well-documented accounts of what took place, and this book definitely covers that. And obviously, look at our paper called Killer Drones. It's authored by Colonel Bill Edwards. It talks about everything we talked about here in the podcast and puts it in a very concise part of what we call the Transregional Threats Journal. So you can download that on our website, securefreesociety.org. And if you're new to the podcast, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, or subscribe to our Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Hit the like button on this video. And also hit the little bell so you get all the notifications of future podcasts as we put them out. Bill, great to have you on the podcast again, and we'll be in touch.
Subscribe to the Border Wars podcast and visit our website at securefreesociety.org. See you in the next episode.